Well, hello everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Are you one of those people who finds yourself in your development cycles, or sprints, if you're using the Scrum terminology, you find yourself wondering, could this be better? Or I wish my team's development sprints were more effective, or I could break through some of the frustrations that I'm having. Well, that's what we're going to be talking about here. I look forward to having you go through this with me. So, my name is Barry Hawkins, and welcome to Barry Hawkins Live, a stream that I do on a weekly basis. I would love for you, if this ends up being something that resonates, for you to hit the like and subscribe buttons, as they say. But hey, let's dive in. So, when we're talking about, what do we mean by development cycle or sprint? The development cycle is that period of time that you start with planning a commitment, and then you go through development and you come to the end and you're looking at, or what we thought we could get done at the start, what did we end up getting done? That is the development cycle. And there are, of the topics that I work with teams on and that people contact me with questions about, this is certainly one of the most frequent ones, because some of the literature and guidance that you would get out there seems super straightforward. You get the steps, you choose this length, and if that all makes sense to you, go forth and prosper. And then you take it back to your team and start trying to make that work. And it doesn't always play out that way. So let's look at some of the key things that you can do to adjust or experiment in making your development sprints more effective. So, the first thing I would say is to ensure that you are planning as a team. I very often see engineering managers or project managers, even some people who call themselves Scrum Masters. They plan a sprint on their own without the team. Sometimes maybe with like a tech lead, or maybe an engineering manager even, who's actually not directly working on the team. And they're breaking work down, and two, they're assigning work to individuals without those individuals being involved. And it seems, I get it, it seems more efficient. Isn't it more efficient to have the people still doing work, still coding, still testing, while I plan out the next development cycle for them? I can 100% understand how it seems that way, but sprint planning or cycle planning has two explicit goals, one more obvious than the other. First, the team is meant to be committing to the work together. And how do they commit to the work together? By planning together. This is especially true if you have a cross-functional team where not all of the team members are engineers, or even engineers in QA, where you have UX persons, data engineers, possibly ops and infrastructure people embedded, security folks, depending on the kind of product you develop, right? There are great things to be discovered when a team takes a series of outcomes and then works together to determine how will we approach accomplishing this work, making these outcomes happen. What explicit things will we do together? And when you have the work being broken down by one or two individuals and not the people doing it, they have to make assumptions on how those people would approach. They often make assumptions that are based on the last time they were actually doing it, or just what they believe this kind of work entails, which usually leads to false assumptions, and I often find also overcommitment, because they will assume things like, this should be simple. Famous last words for sprint planning. Have the team together, because there's a great amount of value in having the team make the commitment together for themselves, among themselves. And that feeds into the second key goal and outcome of effective cycle planning, sprint planning, which is the team should also be learning together. In the same way, for any of you who've not done pair programming, the practice of pair programming before, where there are two programmers working on the same thing together, and one is driving or actually doing the coding with the keyboard, and the other is sitting behind them off to the right or left and watching and asking questions as the person is implementing the code. And there's a great value in being asked questions and having to articulate why you're doing a given thing you're doing. There's something about a thought traveling through your motor speech path that teases out realizations that you that weren't coming through when you were just simply thinking and typing. It's similar to how when you can't find your car keys and you walk through the house and you start talking to yourself aloud and saying, I know I had this here. It's like that. So imagine now that you've got 3, 5, 7, or 8 different cross-functional skills on a team, breaking down and committing work together. How valuable is it to have them all there together and tasking something out? And, a back-end engineer tasks something out and says, well, I'm going to create a new endpoint, and that's going to take me 4 hours. And then someone says, are you creating a new endpoint, or are you just simply updating the response object that's returned for the method that we already call? And then they have a discussion. It's like, actually, I don't need to create a new endpoint. I could just add that to the response because it actually wouldn't break any of the other things that are using the response. But then they stop and say, is that true, fellow team members who are in QA? And they're like, well, I think so, but let's add to the test plan, right? They're building shared understanding. They're learning about one another's skills and how all of those skills come together. So key thing, plan as a team. You commit together, you preserve agency, and you learn together about what it takes for you to holistically, cross-functionally deliver that outcome. Next, start and stop your development cycles or sprints on separate days. I know this may raise hair on the back of some folks' necks, but here's the thinking. When you're doing development work in batches, in cycles, there's a certain amount of effort to spinning up a development cycle or sprint and wrapping it up, shutting it down gracefully. And if you start and stop on the same day, what I typically find is teams, they basically slide in just under the radar on the sprint review and retrospective in the morning, and then they plan the next sprint that afternoon, or heaven forbid, right after they finish the retrospective. So that usually ends up being like 3 or so hours of just nonstop high intensity interaction. And each of them requiring separate kinds of thought and deliberation. So don't do that. If you start and stop on separate days, one of the things that you allow for is the natural slack that should be in a development cycle. Once a team has gone through cycle planning, sprint planning, and they've broken down the work and tasked it out, usually there's some amount of reflection on the body of work and looking at who might run with what and how something might be approached. You also may, some teams preemptively create feature branches, those sorts of things to like tee up all of the version control workflows that are going to be utilized during the cycle. Likewise, on the end, there are typically, sometimes like there are some merges, or like there's this one story that we really finished, but it would be good to give it a little more soak time and regression, or we had some merges that weren't quite done, or we didn't finish all the tagging. And if you can have the sprint review and retrospective in the morning, and then leave the rest of that day for all of that house cleaning and that janitorial work, as it were, to clean up after the sprint, then that typically sets you up for more success as you head into the very next sprint. So think about that, starting and stopping on separate days. Similarly, very, very close and related to this, don't start or stop your sprints on Mondays or Fridays. And why? Now, some people say, well, I love starting, stopping on a Friday and starting on a Monday because it's a very clean break or end to the sprint, and then we start the new one fresh because a weekend has happened. And I there's certainly some value in that. However, if you look at the calendars of most companies and most nations, holidays most often fall on Mondays or Fridays. And people most often begin their PTO or holiday on Mondays or Fridays as well. So you end up having a higher degree of absenteeism, and so not everyone's there to plan with you. And you find yourself having to move sprint, like every time there's a holiday that's a Monday, it's move sprint planning. Or for the ones that are Fridays, oh, well, the retrospective, well, you know what, let's pull this development cycle forward. And you have less of those interruptions when you are, when you're starting and stopping your sprint in the middle of the week. I typically find that it's a more sustainable, and that could be Tuesday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It also helps with load balancing once we're all back in offices and working in that way together. It also helps with load balancing across a finite number of meeting rooms when you're a larger number of teams, or you're just a number of teams that's larger than the meeting rooms you have for sprint planning, cycle planning. Additionally, on the Monday and Friday thing, some folks live for the weekend, and there's something to be said about a bit of continuity between the end of last cycle and the start of the next one, because there's people drink and do things, do lots of things. And sometimes it's really hard to remember, how did that sprint end up? Because I've had 3 strange days. So anyway, that's enough about Mondays and Fridays. Next, using an appropriate cycle duration. So most people believe that Scrum has always had a 2-week cycle. That's what it's always been. And that's what it always should be. Not so. Actually, for many years, many of the early years of Scrum, the default development cycle was 30 days. But then we realized that checking in only 12 times a year was generally not a good idea. And so we eventually adopted the 2-week development cycle, which XP had pioneered and had all along. So 2 weeks I find that if you're using a batch development process, and if you're doing any kind of software development where there's a notable degree of variation between pieces of work, some things are small, some things are pretty big, you should be using a batch development cycle anyway. That'll be another video for another time. But 2 weeks is a sweet spot for most teams. But there are conditions where a 1 week or a 3-week cycle makes sense. For 1 week, when a team has absolutely no dependencies, and if their units of work skew toward the smaller side, a 1 week cycle duration can be more effective. Now, what I will say is most pure software feature development teams rarely have almost no or no dependencies, and are almost always doing baton passes and handoffs with other folks, with other teams. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, a 3-week cycle for work that has long turnaround time between individual tasks or steps, or for work that skews toward the upper ends of the the user story scale or the size scale, a 3-week development cycle sprint can be a sweet spot. I see this very often with data science teams where the units of work that they perform typically don't get very down into the granular. In fact, they all do skew toward the upper bounds of a size range. Similarly, for teams whose work has a high degree of security and audit implications, so it's like send this to legal for review or send this through compliance for review. And then you wait for that, and then you're trying to juggle, like keep all the things going into review, coming back into review so that we complete the sprint. That also can be a good reason for having a longer development cycle. Avoid perpetual moonshots. I have had many teams over the years who sprint after sprint or cycle after cycle, we come in and it's like, all right, so we know that our velocity is 40. So because our velocity is on average for the last 6 cycles, what have we completed? And it's been 40 points. Let's start planning. And 30 minutes into a 2.5-hour sprint planning session, we've already committed to 35 points. And as we careen past 40 into 55, 60, 65, a picture I've used in describing the feeling is, if you've ever played Dungeons and Dragons or watched someone playing Dungeons and Dragons, the dungeon master who's running the game, they are responsible for taking the group through different checks, and sometimes there's a thing called a perception check. They roll, I think it's roll for perception, and in fact, I had this happen with a team, and they all understood D&D, so the analogy carried. And we were overcommitting again by like 50-60% of our capacity, and I said, y'all, I feel like I'm a dungeon master, and you've barely managed to live this far, and we're coming to another darkened doorway, and I ask you to roll for perception, and you've all failed the perception check again, and I'm saying, what do you want to do? And the wizard says, I cast fireball into the darkness, and we hope that things are going to work out. You really want to, you don't want to do that. That's a rough way to live. The idea with a sprint is that you're planning and projecting an amount of work that you have a pretty good chance of making. That doesn't mean you're sandbagging, but it means you really are coming to understand how much schedulable work can we really get through, given our capacity, given our history, and given the number of non-backlog, interrupt-driven work items that hit our queue in the average cycle. So the idea is not for it to be a moonshot every 2 weeks, but rather a sustainable level of throughput. I'd also say, finally, have goals and experiments. If the sprint or the development cycle is just about what work are we committing to? It's this work. Let's do the work. Keep doing the work. Keep doing the work. Let's review the work. Did we finish all the work? Yay! Or did we finish all the work? Most of it. Which ones? These ones. Which ones did we not finish? These ones. That's disappointing. Oh well, let's do it again. That's mind-numbing, and it takes out at least one, maybe 2 of the 3 key parts of what makes development cycles work. Which development cycles, what XP uses, what Scrum uses. It's from a process control standpoint, it's what's called empirical process control, and there are 3 key pillars to empirical process control: transparency, inspection, and adaptation. And you should be inspecting how you're doing as a team and adapting based on what you're seeing, and having goals of what are we going to try to do. Everyone's going to merge to master at the end of every day, or we're not going to insist on reducing every story down to 2 points. Because how did we ever get into that state of mind anyway? Be thinking about, have goals and things you're trying to see, does this improve how we work together as a team? Have work for QA to test and regress by the 3rd day of the sprint. That's an awesome one to try. I highly endorse that. It's definitely worked out for me in the past. So those are a few things that you can try to have more effective development cycles. Now, when it comes to questions, some of the common questions here, let's take a look. What if my team carries over work every cycle or sprint? Well, that's what I was referring to around the avoid perpetual moonshots. Take a look at, and metrics are in a separate video, but of the 2 metrics, throughput or velocity, that's one of them. But the second metric, which is projected to completed ratio, that's tracking on an ongoing basis the ratio of story points or effort that you project or commit to, and how much you complete. And you want that number to be hovering around 1. It doesn't like stay artificially pristine at 1.0 or but you should generally see it, hovering around that 1 ratio of 1, because you understand how much as a team you can responsibly commit to and deliver. But I find that teams do, it's like every sprint, it's like let's pull in 60% more as a stretch goal. Stretch goals are for people in sales. That's not for a development team. With development, you've got a queue of work. There's no need for a stretch goal. Commit to what you think you can do as a team, and if you finish it all early, guess what? There's still a whole queue of work for you to pull in. Just do that. There's always going to be more for you to do. Just keep an eye on your projected to completed ratio, and have that conversation as you go into sprint planning. Like review and remind yourselves of your metrics. Let's see here. If my team has trouble completing sprints, should we just switch to Kanban or a flow-based development process? Not completing sprints should not be your basis or rationale for switching to Kanban or a flow-based development process. Flow-based development process is for when you have very uniform units of work that go through a very explicit workflow and series of steps in a linear fashion. And that is not what software feature development usually is. No, if you're having trouble completing sprints, look at some of the things we've talked about. Cycle duration, understanding cycle duration, is the way your sprint starts and stop kind of hectic? Are you jamming it all up on the same day? Try splitting it out. End on one day, start on another. See if that helps, because you want to get to that point of projecting as what you complete. And what I find when people move to Kanban is the small work flows through nicely. So, on the story point scale, their 1, 2, 3, 5s flow through really nicely, but it's their 8s, 13s, and 20s. I talk about, if flow is a pipeline, your larger stories or items, they tend to get stuck to the sides, kind of like those health videos, where they would, as a kid in health class, where they would show like, this is how people get heart disease. The fat sticks to the walls of their aorta and stuff. It's like that. You're clogging your arteries with larger stories, because flow is built for smaller, more uniform units of work to flow through. So when you try to put those larger things in there, they get stuck or blocked up. It's like if you tried to pee out a bowling ball or something, right? That's not going to work out well. Anyway, let's not continue that analogy. What if I can't get my team to talk during sprint planning, daily stand-up, retrospective? Okay, this is a good question. The thing is, much literature and some training that you can go take will teach you that agile development process, agile approaches to development process are a rote set of mechanics. And if you understand the mechanics, and if you recite them as covered in the PowerPoint deck that you went through for 2 days, then you take that back to the team, start reciting the mechanics, and success is going to rain down on you like magic. But it doesn't, does it? And that's because it's not just a rote series of mechanics. There's a high degree of facilitation skill that's required in stewarding team development process. And software engineering, software product development as a field, it does tend to draw the more introverted of us, like myself, and bringing those people into the conversations that are supposed to be happening and the interactions that are supposed to be happening in sprint planning and daily stand-up and retrospective. It doesn't happen naturally. People need to feel safe and they need to feel invited. And in all fairness, in most software development environments and settings and processes that people are exposed to, they're not invited to participate, to pipe up, to chime in. So I would say, if you're having trouble with that, look into books and resources on facilitation and facilitating conversations. There's a ton of great stuff out there. Some of it even on like LinkedIn Learning or Coursera. But the team steward, or like Scrum Master, if you use the Scrum terminology, but the person who's stewarding the health and effectiveness of the team and doing that through development process, you're not trying to drive a team through a sprint. You're trying to facilitate bringing them together to plan, commit, execute, demonstrate, and reflect on the work they've done on an ongoing basis, so that increasingly over time, they feel a higher degree of psychological safety. And as a result, they will begin to feel more comfortable discussing, disagreeing, debating, and that healthy exchange is core to making teams really effective and healthy, in my experience. Well, hey, that's what we have time for today. This is, as you could tell, this is another video in the theme of team level development process. And I know those of you who are, you're wondering and waiting, when are we going to talk about user stories and the, product requirements, that sort of thing? When are we going to talk about the scaling stuff? It's coming. Just be patient. We'll get to it. I promise. Believe me. But the first thing is, for me, we have to have a foundation of what an effective team level setting looks like. Because for me, in my experience, the team units, those are the cellular organisms of agile product development. And if you don't have those healthy cells, you can scale it and group it and framework it all you want. But if there's not health at the cell, there's not going to be health at the organ or organism. So we'll get there. But first, we're going to get us a bit of a base to work from. So yeah, that's it for today. Again, we still weekly cadence every Thursday, 7 p.m. Pacific. And thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.